Hi, friends. You may think the tales of Pompeii are etched only in stone and ash, preserved for humans to uncover centuries later. But have you ever paused to wonder what it felt like through the eyes of a simple dog like me who trotted those ancient streets, feeling the earth's subtle tremors long before the sky turned to fire? I was there, a loyal companion in a world of marble and murmurs, and tonight I'll share my story to guide you into a peaceful slumber. Welcome to the Animal Historian channel. I invite you to rest, relax, and let this animal history sleep story carry you away on whispers of historical ASMR. If you enjoy these journeys through Pompeii, history, and beyond, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight. Share it in the comments below and tell me which animal story you'd like to hear next. Your ideas inspire the next adventures. I remember the warmth of the sun on my fur, the way it filtered through the leaves of the olive groves, casting gentle shadows that danced like playful pups across the ground. My name, as the humans called me, was Lupus, simple, fitting for a dog of my kind, a sturdy little hound with a coat of mottled brown and white, ears that flopped just so when I ran. But in my own thoughts, I was simply me, a creature born into the bustling world of Pompeii, where the air always carried the faint scent of sea salt mingled with the earthy aroma of fresh-baked bread from the ovens nearby. It was the year 62 CE, though time for me was measured in the cycles of day and night, the fullness of my belly, and the kindness of hands that stroked my back. My origins were humble, as most dogs are in such places. I was whelped in a quiet corner of a villa on the outskirts of Thessaly, where the land sloped gently toward the Bay of Naples. My mother was a watchful guardian, her body warm and reassuring as she nursed me and my siblings, 4 of us in total, squirming bundles of fur that yelped softly in the dim light of the stable. The stable itself was a haven of straw and shadows, smelling of hay and the musky presence of horses that stamped their hooves in rhythm with the distant waves. I can still feel the roughness of that straw under my tiny paws, the way it prickled, yet comforted. A bed made by nature's own hand. The villa belonged to a merchant named Gaius, Amon, with a beard that scratched when he laughed, and eyes that crinkled with stories of far-off lands. He traded in wine and olive oil, goods that flowed from the fertile slopes of Vesuvius itself, that great mountain that loomed like a sleeping giant over our world. Vesuvius was always there, its peak often capped with a lazy plume of smoke that the humans dismissed as harmless. A sign of the gods' favor, perhaps. To me, it was just part of the landscape, a place where the earth smelled richer, warmer, as if the ground held secrets deep within. As a pup, my world was small and wondrous. I learned to navigate by scent first, the sharp tang of citrus from the lemon trees in the garden, the smoky hint of charcoal from the hippocaust that warmed the floors in winter. My siblings and I would tumble over each other, nipping at tails and ears in games that taught us the ways of survival. Mother would watch, her tongue lolling in quiet approval, occasionally nudging us back into line with a gentle paw. The humans of the household were kind in their way. Gaius's wife, Flavia, would sneak us scraps of cheese and crusts from Vetable, her voice soft as she cooed, "Good little Lupus, grow strong now." Her touch was light, like the brush of a feather, and it made my tail wag in slow, contented circles. Pompeii, in those early years, was a tapestry of sounds and smells that enveloped me like a warm blanket. The city was alive, a thriving port town under Roman rule, with streets paved in smooth stone that clicked under my claws as I grew bolder and ventured out. I recall the Forum, that grand open space where merchants hawked their wares, silks from the east, spices that tickled my nose with exotic heat, and fish fresh from the sea, their scales glistening in the sunlight. The air there was a symphony, the low hum of voices bargaining, the clip-clop of donkeys pulling carts laden with amphorae, and the occasional bark of other dogs like me, staking their claims to scraps or shade. Historically, Pompeii was a jewel of Campania, founded centuries before by the Oscans, then shaped by the Greeks and Etruscans, before the Romans claimed it in 80 BCE. By my time, it was a prosperous colony, home to perhaps 11,000 souls, with the villas for the wealthy and insulae for the common folk. The aqueducts brought fresh water from the mountains, feeding the fountains that bubbled softly, their trickle a constant lullaby. I loved lapping from those fountains, the cool water soothing my throat after a day of exploration. The baths, too, were a wonder. The Stabian baths, with their steam rising like morning mist, carrying scents of olive oil and lavender that the humans used to anoint their skin. But from my perspective, it was the sensory details that painted my world. The feel of the warm pumice stones underfoot, worn smooth by countless feet. The distant rumble of carts on the Via dell'Abbondanza, where shops lined the way with colorful frescoes depicting gods and daily life. I saw Jupiter in those paintings, thunderbolt in hand, and wondered if he noticed small creatures like me. The smells were endless. The yeasty rise of bread from the bakeries where millstones ground wheat into flour with a steady grind. The sharp bite of garum, that fermented fish sauce the Romans adored, fermenting in vats that made my nose wrinkle, yet drew me closer in curiosity. As I grew, leaving the safety of the villa more often, I became a wanderer of sorts. Dogs in Pompeii were common companions, guardians of homes, hunters in the fields, or simply pets like me. Archaeological finds would later reveal casts of dogs just like mine, preserved in the ash. But in life, we were free to roam. I had a collar of leather etched with Gaius's name to mark me as his, but the streets were my playground. I'd trot beside the children, playing knucklebones in the alleys, their laughter light and fleeting, or follow the scent trails left by cats that slinked through the shadows. One memory stands out softly: the festivals, the Ludi Apollinares, held in July, when the city bloomed with garlands and they're filled with the sweet smoke of incense burning in temples. I'd weave through the crowds at the temple of Apollo, feeling the cool marble under my paws, hearing the priests chant in low rhythmic tones that vibrated through the ground. The statues of gods gazed down impassively, but to me, they were just tall, stones with eyes that never blinked. During these times, the humans were generous, tossing bits of sacrificial meat my way, tender lamb or pork, flavored with herbs that made my mouth water. Yet even in those peaceful days, there were hints of the Earth's unrest. In 62 CE, when I was still young, a great earthquake shook the land. I felt it first, a deep, uneasy vibration in my bones, like the growl of a larger beast underground. The humans called it the wrath of the gods, but to me it was terror. Buildings crumbling with a roar that hurt my ears, dust filling the air like a choking fog. I huddled under a table in the villa, whining softly as stiles fell around me. Gaius found me there, his hands steady as he pulled me close, murmuring words I didn't understand, but felt in their calm tone. It's over, Lupus. The gods test us, but we endure. The quake damaged much of Pompeii. The Forum's basilica cracked, homes tilted precariously. Reconstruction began almost immediately, with Emperor Nero sending aid from Rome. Scaffolding rose like skeletal trees, and the air smelled of fresh mortar and sawed wood. 4 years after, the city rebuilt, grander than before, with new frescoes adorning walls, depicting scenes of banquets and myths that seemed to come alive in the flickering lamplight. I watched the workers, their hammers tapping in a steady rhythm that lulled me to sleep in the afternoons. Daily life settled into a gentle routine. Mornings began with the crow of roosters and the soft light creeping over the horizon, painting the bay in hues of pink and gold. I'd accompany Gaius to the market, my nose to the ground, picking up trails of spilled wine or dropped fruits. The harbor was a favorite spot. The creak of ships' timbers, the salty brine that clung to everything, and the calls of fishermen unloading their catch. Vesuvius watched over it all, its slopes terraced with vineyards that produced the finest wines, like the Falernian that Gaius prized. In the evenings, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, I'd curl up by the hearth in the villa's atrium. The hypocaust warmed the floors, a gentle heat that seeped into my fur, making my eyelids heavy. Flavia would spin wool nearby, her spindle whirring softly, while Gaius read scrolls by oil lamp, his voice murmuring tales of Hercules or the Punic Wars. The night was quiet, so very quiet, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant bark of a fellow dog. Looking back, those years before the great event were a time of simple joys. I chased butterflies in the gardens, their wings fluttering like whispers. I nuzzled the hands of visitors, sensing their moods through the subtle sense of sweat or perfume. Pompeii was a world of abundance, fruits ripening on trees, flowers blooming in peristyles, and the constant hum of life that felt eternal. Yet beneath it all, the mountains lumbered, its breath a faint steam that no one heeded. As I grew older, my senses sharpened. I could hear the faint tremors that humans ignored, feel the warmth in the soil that hinted at fires below. But life went on, calm and unchanging, like the steady lap of waves on the shore. The city thrived, unaware, and I, a small dog in its midst, lived in the moment, content with the warmth of the sun and the rhythm of days. It was in these formative years that I formed bonds that would shape my story. Gaius treated me as more than a pet. I was his shadow, following him to the Thermopolia for quick meals of hot sausages and bread, or to the amphitheater where gladiators trained, their grunts echoing like thunder. The amphitheater, built after the quake, could hold thousands, and I'd sit at the edges, watching the mock battles with a tilted head, never understanding the human's love for such clamor. Flavia, too, held a special place. She was with child in those days, her belly rounding like a ripe melon, and I'd rest my head against it, feeling the faint kicks within. Her scent changed, sweeter, milkier, and it brought a protective instinct in me. The household slaves, like the young boy Marcus who fed me, became familiar, their laughter light as they worked in the kitchens, grinding spices that filled the air with warmth. Pompeii's culture was rich, a blend of Roman efficiency and local traditions. The walls bore graffiti, messages of love, politics, or advertisements for games that I couldn't read but sensed in the chalky scent. The brothels, with their painted signs, emitted odors of perfume and desire that made me sneeze. Temples to Venus, the city's patron, stood proud, with altars where offerings of flowers and wine were left, their petals soft under my paws. As the years passed, 63, 64, 65 CE, the city healed from the quake. New buildings rose, like the central baths, with mosaics of sea creatures that gleamed wetly. I explored them all, my claws clicking on tiles, the steam wrapping around me like a fog. Life was peaceful, the earth quiet once more. But subtle changes came, minor shakes, dismissed as after effects, wells drying up, then refilling, animals acting strangely, birds fleeing nests, cats hissing at nothing. I felt it too, an unease in my gut. But the humans carried on, building, trading, living. By 79 CE, I was an adult dog, wise in the ways of the streets, loyal to my family. Little did I know, the mountain's awakening loomed. For now, though, days were warm, the nights serene, and Pompeii slept under stars that twinkled like distant fires. The days in Pompeii flowed like the gentle current of the Sarno River, steady and predictable, each one blending into the next with a rhythm that soothed my canine heart. By 79 CE, I was no longer the clumsy pup of my youth, but a seasoned dog, my mottled fur flecked with the dust of the streets, my senses attuned to the pulse of the city. My life revolved around Gaius and Flavia's villa, but my spirit belonged to Pompeii itself, its alleys, its markets, its hidden corners where the scent of thyme and rosemary lingered in the air. I was Lupus, the dog who knew every cobblestone, every vendor's call, every shadow cast by the midday sun. Daily life in the villa was a tapestry of routine and warmth. Mornings began with the soft clatter of pots in the kitchen, where Marcus, now a lanky youth, prepared flatbreads and porridge for the household. The smell of barley and olive oil would drift through the atrium, pulling me from my slumber. By the hearth, I'd stretch, my claws scraping lightly against the mosaic floor, depicting a leaping fish, and pad toward the kitchen, tail wagging in anticipation of a scrap. Marcus, always obliged, tossing me a crust with a grin, his voice low and playful. "Lupus, you greedy hound, leave some for the rest of us." His laughter was a melody, light and fleeting, like the chirp of sparrows in the garden. Gaius was often up early, his sandals slapping against the stone as he prepared for the day's trade. I'd follow him to Thetablinum, where scrolls and wax tablets littered his desk, their waxy scent mingling with the ink he used to record his transactions. Pompeii was a hub for commerce, its port welcoming ships from Alexandria, Carthage, and beyond. Gaius dealt in amphorae of Vesuvian wine, their clay sealed with wax that bore thescent of pine resin. I'd sit at his feet as he haggled with traders, their voices rising and falling like waves, discussing prices in sesterces. I never understood their words, but the rhythm of their speech was as comforting as the lapping of the sea. Flavia, now a mother to a small girl named Livia, spent her days tending to the household. Livia was a toddling bundle of energy, her tiny hands grabbing at my ears or burying themselves in my fur. I endured her tugs with patience, sensing the joy in her giggles, the warmth of her small body as she hugged me close. Flavia would watch us, her spindle pausing as she smiled, her eyes soft with love. "Lupus, you're her guardian now," she'd murmur, and I'd feel a swell of pride, my tail thumping against the floor. The villa's garden was Livia's playground, where she chased me among therosa bushes, their petals falling like soft rain. The scent of roses clung to my fur, a reminder of those quiet moments. Beyond the villa, Pompeii was a world of endless discovery. The streets were alive with activity, each corner offering a new sensory delight. The Via dell'Abbondanza, the city's main thoroughfare, was my favorite route. It bustled with shops selling everything, from garum to fine jewelry, their awnings casting cool shade where I'd rest on hot days. The Thermopolia, those open-fronted eateries, were a treasure trove of smells: roasted pork, lentils simmering with cumin, and the yeasty tang of bread. I'd linger near the counters, my nose twitching, until a kind patron tossed me a morsel. The humans here were generous, their lives intertwined with ours in a way that felt natural, unspoken. Pompeii's streets were a map of scents and sounds, the clatter of cartwheels on the raised stepping stones, designed to keep feet dry during rains, echoed like a heartbeat. The fountains at every crossroad gurgled softly, their water cool and sweet when I lapped at it. I'd weave through the crowds, dodging the hems of togas and the sandaled feet of slaves carrying amphorae, the graffiti on the walls, declarations of love, insults, or boasts about gladiators, carried the faint scent of chalk and paint, a human habit I found curious but never questioned. The city was a blend of cultures, its history layered like the strata of Vesuvius itself, founded by the Oscans, shaped by Etruscans and Greeks. It was now thoroughly Roman, yet traces of its past lingered. The Temple of Isis, with its exotic murals and incense-heavy air, drew worshippers who chanted in rhythms that felt foreign, yet mesmerizing. I'd sit outside, listening to the low hum of prayers, the scent of myrrh curling around me like a warm blanket. The amphitheater, rebuilt after the 62 CE quake, was another draw on game days. The roar of the crowd was deafening, but I'd find a quiet spot near the entrance, watching gladiators strut past, their armor clinking like coins. I never understood their need to fight, but the energy of the crowd thrilled me, their cheers vibrating through my paws. Vesuvius was ever present, its slopes a patchwork of vineyards and orchards. I'd sometimes follow Gaius to the fields where workers pruned vines under the mountain's watchful gaze. The soil there was rich, almost too warm underfoot, and the air carried a faint sulphurous tang that made my nose twitch. The humans spoke of the mountain's fertility, its gifts of wine and olives, but I sensed something deeper, a restless pulse, like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. Yet life continued, oblivious to these whispers. My days were filled with small adventures. I'd chase cats through the alleys, their hisses sharp but fleeting as they vanished over walls. I'd nap in the shade of the forum's columns, where orators debated politics or law, their voices a distant drone that lulled me to sleep. The bakeries were a haven, their ovens radiating warmth, the scent of flour and yeast wrapping around me like a hug. I'd watch the millstones turn, powered by donkeys whose steady steps matched my own heartbeat. The seasons turned, marked by festivals that brought the city to life. The Vinalia, celebrating the wine harvest, filled the air with the sweet aroma of crushed grapes. I'd trail behind processions, my nose catching the scent of spilled wine and burning herbs offered to Bacchus. The Saturnalia in December was chaos. Slaves became masters for a day, and the streets rang with laughter and song. I'd dart through the crowds, snatching bits of honeyed cakes dropped in the revelry, my tail wagging at the sheer joy beneath the city's vibrancy. There were signs I couldn't ignore. The earth would tremble now and then, not as fiercely as in 62 CE, but enough to make me pause, ears pricked, hackles raised. Wells would dry up unexpectedly, then flow again days later. Birds would take flight in sudden flocks, their wings a blur against the sky. Other dogs barked more often, their voices edged with unease. I felt it too, a prickle in my bones, a warmth in the ground that wasn't just the sun's doing. The humans noticed too, sometimes, but they'd laugh it off, saying Vesuvius was merely stirring in its sleep. Gaius and Flavia remained my anchors. Gaius would take me on walks to the harbor, where we'd watch ships unload exotic goods, spices that stung my nose, silks that shimmered like water. He'd talk tome as we walked, his voice steady, telling me of Rome's grandeur, or the latest gossip about the Emperor Vespasian. I didn't understand the words, but his tone was a comfort, like the steady beat of a drum. Flavia, meanwhile, taught Liviato toss me sticks in the garden, her laughter bright as she clapped when I retrieved them. Those moments were peace itself, the world soft and warm, the night so very quiet. The city's rhythm was my own. I knew their routines of the street vendors, the times when the baths were busiest, the hours when the temples grew silent. I'd curl up in the villa's peristyle at night, the stars above bright against the black sky, the air cool with the scent of jasmine. The earth seemed steady then, the mountain a silent guardian, but deep within, I sensed a change coming, a shift as subtle as the wind turning before a storm. Pompeii was my home, its streets my paths, its people my pack, I was just a dog, unnoticed by most. But I saw it all. The beauty, the bustle, the hints of what was to come, as I lay by the hearth each night. The warmth seeping into my fur, I felt content, unaware that the mountain's slumber was nearing its end. As the summer of 79 CE unfolded, Pompeii basked in a deceptive calm, its days stretching long and lazy under the relentless sun. I, Lupus, had grown into the fullness of my dog years, my steps sure and measured as I patrolled the familiar paths of the city. The air was thick with the scent of ripening figs and blooming oleanders, their petals carpeting the ground like a soft, fragrant blanket. Vesuvius loomed as always, its green slopes a promise of bounty. But I began to notice subtle shifts, a warmth in the earth that lingered longer, a faint acrid tang on the breeze that made my nose wrinkle in quiet unease. Yet the humans carried on, their lives steady hum of activity, oblivious to the mountain's whispers. In the villa, routines held sway, providing a comforting anchor amid the growing undercurrents. Gaius's business thrived. The harbor was busier than ever, with ships arriving laden with goods from across the empire. I'd accompany him to the docks, my paws padding softly on the wooden planks that creaked under the weight of crates. The sea air was invigorating, salted and sharp, mingled with the exotic aromas of cinnamon from Egypt and amber from the north. Sailors shouted in tongues I didn't know, their voices a cacophony that blended into a rhythmic lullaby. Gaius would inspect his shipments, his brow furrowed in concentration, while I sniffed at the edges, chasing away rats that dared approach. Flavia and Livia filled the home with gentle energy. Livia, now a curious child of 5, would ride on my back through the garden, her small hands clutching my fur as she laughed. Faster, Lupus, like the chariots in the circus, she'd cry, her voice high and sweet. I'd trot obligingly, feeling the warmth of her against me, her scent of milk and sunshine a balm to my senses. Flavia watched from the shade of the pergola, her needlework pausing as she smiled. The garden was a haven, fountains trickling softly, bees droning among the lavender, the earth soft and yielding under my paws. But beyond the villa's walls, the city stirred with its own rhythms, and I sensed the first faint omens of change. The wells in the Forum began to bubble strangely, their water taking on a mineral taste that made me lap less eagerly. Birds, usually chattering in the trees, grew silent or took flight in erratic patterns, their wings a fleeting shadow against the sky. Other animals felt it too. Cats arched their backs at nothing. Donkeys brayed uneasily in their stables. I found myself pacing more at night, my ears pricked to the distant rumbles that humans dismissed as thunder from afar. Historically, the year 79 CE was under the reign of Emperor Titus, who had succeeded his father Vespasian. Rome was recovering from the Great Fire and the civil wars. But in Pompeii, life felt distant from imperial intrigues. The city was a microcosm of the empire, prosperous, cultured, with public buildings that spoke of civic pride. The large theater hosted plays by Plautus and Terence, their words echoing in laughter and applause. I'd sit at the fringes during performances, The actors' masks grotesque, yet fascinating, their gestures broad and exaggerated. The scent of popcorn. No, wait. That was garum and olives, shared among the audience, wafted down, tempting me closer. The build-up to the eruption was insidious, marked by a series of minor earthquakes that the residents had grown accustomed to since 62 CE. In early August, the tremors increased in frequency, though still mild. I felt them keenly, a vibration that started deep in the ground, rising like a shiver through my body. One such quake rattled the villa's shelves, sending a clay lamp tumbling to the floor with a soft crash. Gaius cursed mildly, righting it, while Flavia clutched Livia close. "Just another shake," Gaius said, his voice steady, but I whined softly, pressing against his leg, sensing the lie. In the earth's calm, the markets reflected the city's resilience. The Macellum, with its central tholos and stalls of fresh produce, buzzed with haggling. I'd weave through legs, snatching fallen apples or bits of cheese. The vendor's calls a familiar chorus. Fresh figs from Vesuvius, sweeter than honey. The mountain's fruits were indeed prized, their juiciness a testament to the volcanic soil. But I noticed the vines wilting earlier than usual, leaves curling as if scorched by an invisible flame. Social life in Pompeii was vibrant, with banquets and gatherings that spilled into the nights. Gaius hosted friends in the triclinium, reclining on couches as slaves served courses of dormice in honey, peacock tongues, and wine diluted with water. I'd lie under the table, my head on Gaius's sandal, lapping at drips of sauce that fell. The conversations drifted over me. Talk of elections, with candidates' names painted on walls. Gossip about the Gladiator barracks, where fighters trained for the upcoming games. Nero's ghost still haunts the arena, one guest joked, but I only cared for the warmth of the room, the soft glow of lamps flickering like stars. Livia's world was simpler, and through her, I saw the innocence of childhood. We'd play in the palestra of the baths, where she splashed in the shallow pools, her laughter echoing off the tiled walls. The baths were a daily ritual for many. The tepidarium's mild heat, the caldarium's steam enveloping like a cloud. Waited outside, hearing the murmurs of bathers discussing omens, strange lights on Vesuvius at night, animals fleeing the slopes. The gods are restless, they'd say, but then laugh it off with a splash. As August wore on, the signs intensified. On the 20th, a stronger tremor cracked a fountain in the forum, water spilling like tears onto the stones. I barked at the ground, paws digging futilely, but the humans repaired it swiftly, unconcerned. The sky took on a hazy quality. Insects swarmed more thickly, their buzz a constant undertone. I found myself avoiding certain streets where the pavement felt unnaturally warm, steering Livia away with gentle nudges. In the villa, preparations for the Volcanalia festival on August 23rd brought a festive air. Altars were set with offerings to Vulcan, god of fire, to appease his forge. Incense burned slowly, its smoke curling lazily, scenting the air with pine and myrrh. Gaius sacrificed a small fish, its scales glinting, while Flavia prayed for protection. I watched, head tilted, sensing the irony. The mountain Vulcan's domain stirring even as they honored him. The night before the eruption, August 23rd, was deceptively peaceful. The city celebrated with bonfires and music, flutes and lyres, playing melodies that floated on the breeze. I roamed the streets, drawn by the smells of roasted meats and spiced wine. Crowds gathered in the forum, toasts raised to the gods, their voices a harmonious drone. But as midnight approached, a low rumble echoed from Vesuvius, faint yet ominous. I froze, ears forward, a growl building in my throat. The humans paused, then continued, attributing it to the festival's revelry. Returning home, I curled beside Livia's bed, her small hand dangling to stroke my ear. The villa was quiet, the hippocast's warmth a gentle hum. Outside, the stars shone clear, the mountain a dark silhouette, but sleep eluded me. I paced the atrium, whining softly, the earth's pulse quickening beneath me. The morning of August 24th dawned bright, the sun rising over the bay in a blaze of gold. Birds sang as usual, but fewer than before. Gaius rose early, planning a trip to the harbor. I followed him out, but halted at the gate, a strange pressure in the air, like before a storm, yet the sky was clear. By midday, the first signs appeared, a column of smoke rising from Vesuvius, thicker than the usual vapor. The humans pointed, murmuring, "The mountain awakens." I barked urgently, but they watched curiously, not yet afraid. As the plume grew, ash began to fall like soft snow, gray and fine, dusting my fur. The ground trembled again, stronger now, dislodging tiles from roofs. Panic stirred. Voices rose in alarm, animals stampeded in pens. Gaius rushed back, gathering the family. To the harbor, he decided. But the streets were chaos. People fleeing with belongings, carts jamming the ways. I stayed close to Livia, her hand in my fur. As we navigated the growing darkness, the sky turned midday to twilight, the air thick with ash that choked and stung. Sounds muffled, the world narrowing to the next step, the next breath. But this is jumping ahead. The buildup was gradual, the omens ignored until too late. In those final days, Pompeii lived on, beautiful and blind, while I, a simple dog, felt the fire stirring below. The morning of August 24th, 79 CE, began like so many others in Pompeii, with the sun rising gently over the Bay of Naples, casting a golden glow on the water that sparkled like scattered jewels. I, Lupus, stirred from my spot in the atrium, shaking off the night's dew from my fur, my nose twitching at the familiar scents of baking bread and sea salt. But there was something different in the air, a subtle heaviness, a faint tremor in the earth that made me pause, ears perked, before I padded toward the kitchen for my morning scrap. Gaius was already up, sipping his watered wine, while Flavia hummed softly as she arranged flowers in a vase. Livia slept on, her small form curled under a woolen blanket, unaware of the mountain's awakening. As the hours slipped by, the first true signs emerged. Around noon, a low rumble echoed from Vesuvius, deeper than thunder, vibrating through the ground and into my paws. I barked sharply, hackles rising, but the humans glanced up curiously, shading their eyes against the sun. Look there, Gaius murmured, pointing to the mountain. A plume of smoke rose from its summit, thicker and darker than the usual vapors, twisting upward like a great pine tree reaching for the gods. The air grew still, the birds falling silent, and I felt a prickle of fear, an instinct urging me to run, to hide. Yet I stayed by the villa's gate, watching as the column grew, spreading at the top into a vast umbrella that shaded the sky. The humans of Pompeii reacted slowly at first, gathering in the streets to stare and whisper. It's Vulcan at his forge, some said, recalling the festival just the day before. Others, remembering the earthquakes, felt a stir of unease. In the forum, merchants paused their haggling, their voices a low murmur, blending with the distant roar. I trotted through the crowds, my nose assaulted by the first hints of sulfur, sharp and biting, like rotten eggs left in the sun. Ash began to fall, fine particles at first, like gray snowflakes, dusting the rooftops and my fur. I shook them off, sneezing as children laughed, and tried to catch them on their tongues. Gaius returned from the market, his face etched with concern. The mountain spews fire, he told Flavia, who clutched Livia close. But it's far off. Perhaps it will pass. They decided to wait, as many did, securing shutters and gathering indoors. I paced the atrium, whining softly, the ground trembling again, dislodging a tile from the impluvium with a soft clatter. The sky darkened unnaturally, midday, turning to dusk, the sun a hazy orb behind the ash cloud, sounds muffled, the world closing in, and I pressed against Livia's leg, feeling her small hand in my fur for comfort. Historically, the eruption of Vesuvius began around 1 p.m. on August 24th, as described by Pliny the Younger in his letters to Tacitus. He watched from Misenum across the bay, noting the pine-shaped cloud. In Pompeii, the initial phase was a Plinian eruption, ejecting pumice and ash-high into the atmosphere, which then rained down on the city. Winds carried the fallout southeast, blanketing Pompeii in layers that would eventually reach several meters deep. The residents, accustomed to the mountain's activity, didn't immediately flee. Many stayed, hoping it was a passing event. As the afternoon wore on, the fallout intensified. Pumice stones, light and porous, began to clatter down like hail, bouncing off roofs and streets with a rhythmic patter. I dodged them in the garden, their warmth surprising underfoot, as if heated by some underground oven. The air thickened with ash, making it hard to breathe, coating my tongue with grit. Gaius and Marcus nailed boards over windows, their hammers tapping steadily, while Flavia lit lamps early, their flames flickering in the gloom. Livia clung to me, her eyes wide, whispering, "Lupus, what's happening?" I nuzzled her, my tail low, offering what comfort I could. The city descended into controlled chaos. In the streets, people hurried home, covering their heads with cushions or cloaks against the falling debris. Carts jammed the gates, families loading belongings, silverware, statues, scrolls, in a bid to escape. The wealthy headed for the harbor, hoping for boats, while others sought shelter in cellars or temples. I caught glimpses as Gaius ventured out briefly, The temple of Jupiter, shrouded in ash, priests praying in low tones, the baths empty, their pools rippling with each tremor. The scent of fear was everywhere, sweat mingled with sulfur, a pungent mix that set my nerves on edge. By evening, the pumice layer grew, crunching under my paws like fresh snow, but warm and abrasive. The villa's roof groaned under the weight, and Gaius climbed up to sweep it clear, his broom swishing softly. We must leave soon, he decided, as another quake shook the walls, dust sifting from the frescoes. Flavia packed bread, cheese, her hands steady despite the pallor in her face. Livia wrapped her arms around my neck, burying her face in my fur, her heartbeat rapid against me. The night was anything but quiet now. The constant rumble from the mountain, the hiss of falling ash, the distant cries of alarm. We set out toward the harbor, under cover of darkness, the sky lit sporadically by flashes from Vesuvius, like lightning from the gods. The streets were a maze of shadows, lanterns bobbing like fireflies, illuminating faces etched with worry, pumice piled in drifts, making each step laborious, my legs sinking into the warm stones. I led the way, nose to the ground, navigating by scent through the haze, the salty tang of the sea guiding us. Gaius carried Livia on his shoulders, Flavia clutching his arm, Marcus trailing with the bundle. The harbor was pandemonium, waves churning unnaturally, boats rocking as people clamored. Aboard, ash fell thicker now, blanketing the water like a gray shroud. We pushed through the crowd, voices rising in pleas and shouts, the air choked with dust that made me cough. A ship loomed, its sails furled, captain barking orders. Gaius bartered with coin, securing passage. But as we boarded, a massive tremor hit, the dock cracking with a sharp snap. I leaped aboard, paws scrambling on wet wood, urging the family with barks. But fate turned. The winds shifted, trapping ships in the bay, pumice clogging the oars. We huddled on deck, the boat rocking gently at first, then violently as surges from the eruption stirred the sea. Lightning cracked overhead, volcanic lightning born of the ash cloud, illuminating the horror. Vesuvius spewing fire, lava flows glowing on its slopes, like rivers of blood, the scent of burning wood and sulfur overwhelmed, the heat palpable even from afar. Back in Pompeii, those who stayed faced the worsening onslaught. Roofs collapsed under the pumice's weight, burying homes in silence. Animals howled or fled, but many, like me if I'd stayed, would be trapped. I thought of the other dogs, the cats in alleys, the birds in eaves, all sensing the end. As midnight approached, the eruption entered a new phase. The column collapsed, sending pyroclastic surges, avalanches of superheated gas and ash, racing down the slopes at hurricane speeds. The first surge hit Herculaneum, but Pompeii would soon follow. From the boat, we saw the glow, heard the roar like 1,000 chariots. Trapped at sea, we waited, the ash continuing to fall, the world a gray limbo. I curled around Livia, her tears wetting my fur, the rocking of the boat a cruel lullaby. The event unfolded slowly, inexorably, the mountain's fury, a force beyond comprehension. Yet in that chaos, there were moments of quiet, the soft lap of waves against the hull, the murmur of prayers, the warmth of bodies huddled together. The night stretched on, so very dark, so very heavy with ash and fire. As the night deepened on August 24th, 79 CE, the sea around our beleaguered ship became a restless cradle, rocking us with waves stirred by the mountain's distant fury. I huddled close to Livia on the deck, my fur matted with ash that fell like endless gray rain, each flake warm against my skin. The air was thick, choking with the scent of sulfur and charred earth, but beneath it lingered the salty brine of the bay, a faint reminder of calmer days. Gaius stood at the rail, his hand gripping the wood tightly, while Flavia murmured prayers to Neptune, her voice a soft thread weaving through the chaos. The boat creaked gently, its timbers groaning in rhythm with the swells, and I pressed my body against Livia's side, feeling her tremble, her small fingers buried in my coat for solace. The eruption raged on, unseen but felt in every rumble that vibrated through the water and into our vessel. From our position in the Bay of Naples, the glow of Vesuvius painted the horizon in ominous reds and oranges, like the embers of a vast hearth stirred to life. Flashes of volcanic lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the massive cloud that billowed upward, a monstrous shadow devouring the stars. I whined softly, my ears flattening against the thunderous booms that echoed like the gods' own drums, distant yet insistent. The humans on board whispered among themselves, their faces pale in the flickering light. Sailors, families, merchants, all seeking refuge on the waves, away from the ash-choked land. Historically, as the eruption progressed into its pyroclastic phase, surges of superheated gas, ash, and rock raced down Vesuvius's slopes at speeds over 100 kilometers per hour, temperatures soaring to 300 degrees Celsius or more. These surges, documented by Pliny the Younger, engulfed Herculaneum first, around midnight, burying it under a thick layer of tephra and preserving it in a way that would intrigue future generations. Pompeii, farther southeast, endured the pumice fall longer, but the surges would reach it by early morning on August 25th. From the sea, we escaped the worst, but the winds carried echoes of destruction. Muffled roars, the acrid smoke that stung my eyes and throat. On the ship, time blurred into a haze of waiting. The captain, a grizzled man with salt-crusted beard, barked quiet orders to his crew, their oars dipping softly into the water as they tried to hold position against the currents. Pumice floated on the surface like a gray foam, clinking against the hull with a rhythmic tink-tink, lulling yet eerie. It leapt at a puddle of rainwater collected on deck, gritty with ash, quenching my thirst amid the dryness that coated everything. Livia dozed fitfully against me, her breaths shallow, and I watched over her, my senses alert to every shift in the wind, every distant rumble that hinted at more to come. Gaius shared stories to calm us, his voice low and steady, recounting tales of Odysseus and his voyages, the sea's whims, no match for cunning. "We'll ride this out like heroes of old," he'd say, stroking my head absent-mindedly. Flavia nodded, her eyes on the horizon, where fires snaked down the mountain like glowing veins. The other passengers huddled in groups, sharing bread and wine from their bundles. The soft crunch of crusts and murmurs of conversation, a fragile normalcy. I accepted a morsel from a kind woman nearby, its flavor muted by the ash, but welcome nonetheless. As dawn should have broken on August 25th, Thesky remained shrouded, a perpetual twilight that confused my internal rhythms. The surges hit Pompeii around 1 a.m. and continued in waves, the first collapsing roofs already weakened by pumice. The heat flash carbonizing organic matter. Those who sheltered in basements or sturdy rooms might have survived the initial falls, but the surges sealed their fates, filling every crevice with lethal ash. I imagined the city I knew, the forum silent, streets buried, the villas like ours, entombed in gray, the dogs left behind, barking in confusion, cats fleeing rooftops, birds silenced forever. From the boat, we felt the aftershocks, tremors rippling, the water causing waves that slapped against the sides with a soothing yet ominous slap-slap. The air grew hotter, even at sea, carrying embers that fizzled out on the deck like dying stars. I paced a small circle, uneasy, my paws leaving prints in the accumulating ash that dusted everything like fine powder. Marcus, ever practical, swept it overboard with a broom, the swish-swish, a steady counterpoint to the chaos. Memories of Pompeii flooded me in those hours. The warm stones underfoot, the scent of fresh garum from the shops, the lauder in the baths. Now, it all seemed distant, a dream fading in the ash-filled dawn. Livia stirred, her eyes opening to the gloom, and she whispered, "Lupus, will we go home?" I licked her hand, tasting salt from her tears, offering silent reassurance. Gaius lifted her onto his lap, pointing to faint lights across the bay. Misenum, perhaps, or Stabian, where Pliny the Elder had set out to investigate, his fleet attempting rescues. Before the admiral perished on the shore, the sea saved us, its vastness a buffer against the mountain's wrath. As the surges subsided by midday on the 25th, the plume began to dissipate, though ash continued to fall lightly. The captain navigated toward safer waters, the sails catching a shifting breeze that carried us southward. The rocking gentled, becoming a cradle once more, and exhaustion claimed many, their breaths sinking with the waves. I curled at their feet, my body a warm anchor, the night, or what passed for it, so very quiet now, broken only by the distant hiss of steam from the cooling lava. Reflections came softly in that limbo. I, a simple dog, had witnessed the end of a world, the city's vibrancy silenced in hours. Yet life persisted, the beat of hearts around me, the endless sea's whisper. Pompeii's story, from my eyes, was one of sense lost, sounds muffled, but bonds unbroken. As we drifted, the ash settling like a blanket over the bay, I felt a weary peace, the event's climax yielding to survival's quiet rhythm. The historical record notes the eruption lasted about 18-20 hours, burying Pompeii under 4-6 meters of ash and pumice, preserving it as a time capsule. Excavations centuries later would reveal the casts of bodies, including dogs like me, curled in final moments, but we escaped that fate, carried by waves to new shores. In the following hours, the sky cleared fractionally, hints of blue piercing the gray. Gaius spoke of rebuilding, finding kin in Neapolis. Flavia hummed a lullaby, her voice threading calm through the air. Livia slept again, her hand on my back, rising and falling with my breaths. The ship pressed on, the mountains glow, fading behind us, chapter closing in fire and ash. As the ship cut through the ashen waves, carrying us away from the smoldering shadow of Vesuvius, a fragile calm settled over our small band of survivors. I, Lupus, lay on the deck with my head resting on Livia's lap, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her breathing as she slept, her fingers still tangled in my fur. The sea air, though tainted with the lingering bitterness of sulfur, began to clear, bringing hints of distant lands, perhaps the earthy scent of olive groves, or the faint brine of untouched shores. The rocking of the boat was steady now, a rhythmic cradle that soothed my weary bones, each swell lifting us softly before setting us down again. The journey southward lasted through what felt like an endless twilight, the sky gradually shedding its gray veil as the winds shifted. By the afternoon of August 25th, hints of blue pierced the haze, and the sun emerged like a hesitant friend, warming my fur once more. Gaius stood at the prow, his eyes scanning the horizon, while Flavia distributed the last of our provisions. Stale bread softened with wine, shared in small, deliberate bites. The other passengers murmured thanks to the gods, their voices low and reflective, blending with the slap of water against the hull. I lapped at a trickle of fresh water, collected from a brief rain, its coolness a relief after the grit of ash. We made landfall near Neapolis, a bustling port city that, though touched by the distant fallout, had escaped the mountain's full wrath. The docks were crowded with refugees like us, boats unloading families with soot-streaked faces and bundles of salvaged goods. The air here was cleaner, carrying the welcoming aromas of fresh fish grilling over coals and herbs from market stalls. I leaped ashore first, my paws sinking into the sandy earth, a sensation so different from Pompeii's stone streets, yielding, warm, alive, with the scent of seaweed and salt. Gaius helped Flavia and Livia down, Marcus following with our meager belongings, and we moved inland, the ground steady underfoot after the sea's unrest. Neapolis, or Naples as it would later be known, was a sister city to Pompeii, founded by Greek settlers centuries before, and now a Roman stronghold. Its streets wound up hillsides dotted with villas and temples, the Parthenopean air filled with the calls of seabirds and the distant hum of lyres from taverns. We found shelter with Gaius's kin, a cousin named Quintus, who traded in spices and welcomed us into his modest home overlooking the bay. The villa was simpler than ours had been, no grand frescoes or hippocaust, but the hearth was warm, the blankets soft, and the food plentiful, olives, cheese, and flatbreads that filled my belly with a contented fullness. In those first days of survival, the weight of loss settled gently, like the ash that still clung to our clothes. Pompeii was gone, buried under layers of pumice, and surge deposits that would preserve it for eternity. But in our hearts, it lived on in memories. I wandered the new streets, my nose exploring unfamiliar scents, the sharp tang of citrus from groves, the musky odor of goats in pens. But always, I returned to Livia's side, sensing her quiet grief. She would sit by the window, staring toward the hazy outline of Vesuvius, now quiescent, its peak scarred and smoking faintly. "Home is under the mountain," she'd whisper, and I'd nuzzle her hand, my tail thumping softly, reminding her that home was wherever we were together. Gaius threw himself into rebuilding, bartering what little he had salvaged for tools and goods to restart his trade. Neapolis's markets were alive with opportunity. Merchants from across the empire converging to aid the stricken region. Emperor Titus would soon visit as history records, ordering relief efforts and reconstruction, though, for Pompeii, it was too late. The city entombed, its residents either fled or lost. Quintus shared tales from couriers. Herculaneum vanished under mudflows. Stabian suffocated by ash. Thousands perished in the surges that raced like fiery winds. I listened from the floor, head on paws, the words washing over me like distant waves, but the sorrow in their tones pierced my heart. Flavia adapted with quiet grace, tending a small garden where herbs sprouted in the fertile soil, their green leaves a symbol of renewal. She'd stroke my back as she worked, murmuring, "Life finds a way, Lupus, even after fire." Livia, resilient as children are, began to play again, chasing me through the courtyard. Her laughter light and healing, like the first rain after drought. I'd fetch sticks she threw, my barks soft and playful, the rhythm of our games a balm against the memories of chaos. Reflections came in the quiet hours as I lay by the hearth at night, the flames flickering softly, casting shadows that danced like old friends. I thought of Pompeii's sensory world, the clip-clop of hooves on stone, the yeasty warmth of bakeries, the cool trickle of fountains, all silenced now, preserved in ash casts that would one day reveal dogs, like me, curled in final repose. But I had survived, carried by loyalty and instinct, witnessing the fragility of human endeavors. The mountain, once a benevolent giant, had shown its power, a reminder that the earth breathes, stirs, and reshapes in its own time. In Neapolis, new routines formed. Mornings brought the crow of roosters, and the soft light filtering through shutters, pulling me from sleep. I'd follow Gaius to the harbor, where ships unloaded amphorae of wine from safer vineyards, the scents familiar, yet tinged with novelty. The forum here was grander, with statues of Augustus gazing impassively, and I'd rest in their shade, watching the ebb and flow of life. Festivals resumed, the Neapolitan games honoring the gods, with processions and incense that curled lazily, soothing my senses. Yet echoes of the event lingered. Minor tremors would shake the ground, making me whine and press close to the family. But they passed harmlessly. News trickled in of looters braving the ash fields, salvaging what they could from the buried cities. But Gaius chose to look forward, planting vines on Quintus's land, nurturing growth from the volcanic soil carried in our memories. As seasons turned, winter's chill giving way to spring's bloom, I grew older, my muzzle graying slightly, but my spirit remained vigilant. Livia flourished, learning letters from a tutor, her voice reciting poems that lulled me to doze. The night was quiet, so very quiet in Neapolis, broken only by the hoot of owls or the distant lap of waves. Vesuvius slumbered again, its lesson etched in history, a tale of ash and fire that I, a humble dog, had lived to remember. Survival brought peace, a gentle acceptance of change. We were refugees no more, but part of a new tapestry, woven with threads of loss and hope. In quiet moments, I dream of Pompeii's streets, the warmth of the sun on fur, the rhythm of life undisturbed. But awakening, I'd feel the family's presence, their hands gentle, and know that bonds endured, stronger than any mountain's rage. The days in Neapolis stretched into weeks, then months, as the memory of Vesuvius's wrath began to soften, like the edges of a well-worn stone smoothed by the sea. I, Lupus, found a new rhythm in this unfamiliar city, my paws tracing paths through its winding streets, my nose learning the sense of a world untouched by the ash that had buried Pompeii. The air here was lighter, carrying the tang of citrus blossoms and the smoky warmth of roasted chestnuts from street vendors, a contrast to the heavy sulfur that still haunted my dreams. The villa of Quintus, Gaius's cousin, became our home, its modest walls embracing us with a quiet steadiness that soothed my restless spirit. Life in Neapolis was vibrant, a bustling counterpoint to the stillness that had overtaken Pompeii. The city, nestled along the coast, with its whitewashed buildings climbing the hills, pulsed with the energy of trade and culture. Its port welcomed ships from across the Mediterranean, their sails snapping in the breeze, unloading cargoes of grain, spices, and pottery that filled the air with a mosaic of aromas: nutmeg, clay, and the ever-present salt of the sea. I'd follow Gaius to the docks each morning, my tail wagging at the familiar routine, my claws clicking on the wooden planks as I dodged coils of rope and scurrying rats. Gaius, ever the merchant, rebuilt his trade, bartering for wine and oil from regions untouched by the eruption, his voice steady as he haggled, a calm anchor in our new life. Flavia, too, found her place, her hands busy in the garden where she coaxed mint and basil from the earth, their sharp green scents mingling with the damp soil. She'd hum softly as she worked, her voice a gentle lullaby that drew me to her side, my head resting on my paws as I watched her fingers move with purpose. Livia, now growing taller, her eyes bright with curiosity, would join us, weaving flowers, crowns from daisies, and tossing them onto my head with giggles. "Lupus, you're a king now," she'd declare, and I'd shake my head playfully, petals fluttering to the ground like soft whispers. Quintus's household was kind, their slaves offering me scraps of fish or bread, their hands gentle as they scratched behind my ears. The villa's courtyard, shaded by a pergola draped with vines, became my favorite spot to nap, the dappled sunlight warming my fur as the day unfolded. From there, I could hear the city's pulse, the chatter of neighbors, the clatter of carts, the distant strains of a flute from a nearby tavern. It was a life of new beginnings, yet beneath it lay a quiet ache for what was lost, a longing for the streets I'd once roamed, now buried under ash and time. Historically, Neapolis thrived in the aftermath of the eruption, absorbing refugees and becoming a hub for recovery efforts. Emperor Titus, as recorded by historians like Suetonius, sent funds and officials to aid the region, though Pompeii and Herculaneum were deemed irretrievable, their ruins left to the elements. News reached us through travelers and scrolls read aloud by Quintus, tales of survivors scattered across Campania, of villas emerging from the ash, only to be looted, of the gods' wrath debated in Rome's forums. I listened, head tilted, as Gaius spoke of rebuilding not just trade, but hope. His eyes fixed on a future he could shape with his hands. My days were filled with small explorations. The Neapolitan Forum, grander than Pompeii's, was a marvel of marble and statues, where I'd weave through crowds, sniffing at stalls piled with figs and almonds. The temples here honored Apollo and Demeter, their altars fragrant with incense and offerings of fruit, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. I'd pause outside, my nose twitching at the myrrh, remembering similar scents from Pompeii's Temple of Venus, now lost. The baths, too, were a draw, their steam carrying hints of lavender and oil, the murmur of bathers, a soothing drone as I waited for Gaius or Marcus to emerge, their skin flushed and voices relaxed, but the echoes of the eruption lingered in subtle ways. Minor tremors would shake the earth, brief and harmless, yet enough to make me freeze, ears pricked. A low whine escaping my throat. Livia would soothe me, her hand stroking my back, whispering, "It's just the earth settling, Lupus." The humans spoke of omens, strange lights seen over Vesuvius, wells that bubbled oddly, but life pressed on, resilient and unyielding. Festivals marked the seasons, like the Ludi Neapolitani, with races and plays that filled the streets with laughter and the scent of roasted meats. I'd dart through the crowds, snatching dropped morsels, my tail a blur of joy. In quiet moments, I reflected on my survival, a dog's perspective on a world reshaped by fire. Pompeii had been my playground, its stones warm underfoot, its alleys alive with scents. Now, those memories were like dreams, vivid yet untouchable. I saw them in flashes, the forum's fountains, the baker's oven, the weight of Livia's hand on my fur. Survival meant carrying those images forward, letting them live in the steady beat of my heart, the rhythm of my steps on new ground. Livia grew bolder, her games evolving. She'd lead me to the cliffs overlooking the bay, where we'd watch the sea shimmer under the sun, ships gliding like birds on the water. "Do you think Pompeii misses us, Lupus?" she'd ask, her voice soft, and I'd nudge her hand, my tongue warm against her fingers, offering silent companionship. Gaius and Flavia, too, found healing. Gaius in his trade, Flavia in her garden, both weaving a new tapestry of life. Marcus, now apprenticed to Quintus, learned the spice trade, his hands smelling of saffron and cumin, a scent I'd sniff eagerly when he tossed me scraps. The night was quiet in Neapolis, so very quiet, broken only by the hoot of an owl or the distant bark of another dog. I'd curl up by the hearth, the fire's glow painting the walls with flickering shadows, and dream of Pompeii's streets, now silent under their ash blanket, but awakening. I'd feel the warmth of the family, their presence a steady pulse, and know that we had endured. As spring bloomed, the earth's tremors grew rarer, and Vesuvius faded into a distant silhouette, its scars hidden by new growth. I, too, adapted, my muzzle grayer, my steps slower, but my loyalty unwavering. Neapolis was home now, its rhythms my own, its sense a new map for my senses. The animal history of Pompeii lived in me, a story of ash and fire, of loss and survival, told through the eyes of a dog who had seen the world change and carried on. The seasons turned in Neapolis, weaving a gentle rhythm that cradled us in its embrace, much like the steady lapping of waves against the shore. I, Lupus, had settled into the life of this new city, my paws finding familiar paths through its bustling streets and quiet corners. The air was alive with the sense of spring, blooming jasmine, fresh-cut herbs, and the salty tang of the sea that never failed to stir memories of Pompeii's harbor. My fur, now streaked with more gray than brown, caught the sunlight as I trotted beside Gaius or curled up in Quintus's courtyard, the warmth sinking deep into my aging bones. Life in Neapolis was a tapestry of renewal, each thread a small act of rebuilding. Gaius's trade flourished, his amphorae of Campanian wine and olive oil finding eager buyers in the markets. I'd follow him to the forum, where merchants gathered under awnings, their voices a melodic hum of bartering, prices in sesterces, tales of distant lands, the clink of coins like music. The forum was grand, its columns gleaming white, statues of gods and emperors watching impassively as I wove through the crowds, my nose twitching at the sense of roasted chickpeas and spilled wine. Gaius would pause to scratch my ears, murmuring, "Good Lupus," keeping me company, his voice a steady anchor in the bustle. Flavia's garden became a sanctuary, its rows of mint and rosemary thriving in the fertile soil. She'd kneel among the plants, her hands dusted with earth, the scent of thyme clinging to her fingers as she offered me a sprig to sniff. I'd sneeze, tail wagging, and she'd laugh softly, her eyes crinkling with a warmth that felt like home. Livia, growing lanky and quick, would join us, her lessons with the tutor, now filling her days with poetry and numbers. She'd read aloud, to me in the shade, her voice stumbling over Latin verses, and I'd listen, head on pause, the words a soothing drone like the buzz of cicadas. Quintus's villa was a hub of activity, its doors open to neighbors and kin who brought news of the empire. The eruption's aftermath lingered in their stories. Pompeii and Herculaneum abandoned, their ruins picked over by scavengers, though few dared linger long under Vesuvius's shadow. Emperor Titus's relief efforts, as chronicled by historians like Dio Cassius, brought aid to survivors, with new homes built and lands redistributed. Gaius spoke of friends who'd settled in Puteoli or Cumae, their lives reshaped like ours. I sensed the weight of their loss in the quiet pauses, the way Flavia's hands stilled when Pompeii was mentioned, or how Livia's eyes drifted to the mountain across the bay. My own explorations grew slower, my joints stiffening with age, but curiosity still pulled me through Neapolis's streets. The baths, with their steaming pools and mosaic floors, were a favorite haunt. I'd wait outside, the scent of lavender oil and warm tiles drifting through the air, the laughter of bathers, a distant echo of Pompeii's Stabian baths. The temples, too, called to me. Apollo's shrine, where incense burned in slow curls, its smoke mingling with the sea breeze. I'd sit at the steps, watching priests in white robes offer fruits and wine, their chants a low hum that lulled me into a doze. The city's festivals brought bursts of joy, like the Perilia in April, honoring shepherds and their flocks. Shepherds drove goats through the streets, their bleats mingling with flutes and laughter, garlands of flowers draping every corner. I'd trot alongside Livia, her hands clapping as she joined the dances, her flower crown slipping as she spun. She'd toss me bits of honeyed bread from the feasts, the sweetness bursting on my tongue, a fleeting reminder of Saturnalia in Pompeii, yet the earth still whispered its unease. Occasional tremors, faint as a heartbeat, would ripple through the ground, making me pause mid-step, ears pricked, a low growl in my throat. The humans noticed too, exchanging glances, but Neapolis had weathered the eruption's fallout. These shakes were dismissed as the earth settling. Vesuvius, visible across the bay, stood quiet, its peak softened by new greenery. Though I never trusted its silence, my instincts, honed by survival, felt the mountain's pulse, a reminder of its power. In quiet moments, I reflected on the journey from Pompeii. The animal history of that doomed city lived in me, the warmth of its stones, the chatter of its markets, the scent of garum and roses. I'd survived the ash and fire, carried by loyalty to my family, my senses painting a world now lost. Neapolis offered a new canvas, its colors vibrant, its sounds lively. But Pompeii lingered in my dreams, a city frozen in time, its streets silent under their gray shroud. Livia's growth marked the passage of time. She was no longer the toddler who tugged my ears, but a girl with questions, her mind sharp as she asked Quintus about the stars, or Gaius about Rome. She'd lead me to the cliffs at dusk, where we'd watch the sun sink into the sea, painting the water gold and crimson. "Lupus, do you remember our garden?" she'd whisper, and I'd nudge her hand, my tongue warm against her palm, sharing her quiet longing. Those moments were peace itself, the night so very quiet, broken only by the distant cry of gulls. Gaius and Flavia, too, found balance. Gaius's laughter returned, hearty as he shared wine with Quintus. Their talk of trade and politics. Flavia wove wool in the evenings, her spindle whirring softly, the firelight catching the silver in her hair. Marcus, now a young man, took to the spice trade with zeal, his hands always scented with pepper or saffron, tossing me scraps with a grin that echoed his boyhood. As summer returned, the air thick with the scent of blooming vines, I felt the weight of my years. My muzzle was nearly white, my steps slower, but my heart remained tethered to this family. They were my pack, my purpose, their voices and touch, a constant in a world reshaped by fire. Neapolis was home now, its rhythms my own, yet Pompeii's story lived in me, a tale of survival, of a dog who saw the end and found a new beginning. As summer bloomed into fullness in Neapolis, the days grew long and languid, the sun bathing the city in a golden haze that shimmered over the sea. I, Lupus, moved through this world with a slower gait, my joints stiff, but my spirit still stirred by the scents and sounds around me. The air carried the sweet perfume of ripening grapes from nearby vineyards, mingled with the smoky warmth of fires where fish roasted on open grills. My fur, now more gray than brown, caught the breeze as I lay in the shade of Quintus's courtyard, the vines overhead rustling softly, their leaves casting dappled patterns across my back. Life in Neapolis had woven us into its fabric, each day a thread of routine and resilience. Gaius's trade prospered, his reputation growing as a dealer in fine oils and wines. His visits to the port, a daily ritual I joined when my strength allowed. The docks were alive with activity, sailors unloading, amphitheater, their clay surfaces warm from the sun, the air thick with the sense of tar, salt, and exotic spices from Syria or Hispania. I'd pad alongside Gaius, my nose low, catching whiffs of cinnamon or dried figs, my tail wagging at the familiar chaos. He'd pause to barter, his voice steady and confident, occasionally tossing me a scrap of bread from a vendor's stall, its crust crisp and yeasty. Flavia's garden flourished, a small Eden of herbs and flowers that scented the villa with life. She'd work in the early mornings, her hands deft as she pruned lavender or gathered mint, the sharp green notes clinging to her fingers. I'd lie nearby, my head resting on the cool earth, watching her hum softly, her movements as rhythmic as the tides. Livia, now nearing her 8th year, would join us, her curiosity boundless. She'd braid grasses into tiny crowns for me, giggling as she placed them on my head, declaring, "Lupus, you're the guardian of our garden." Her laughter was a melody, bright and fleeting, like the chirp of sparrows at dawn. Quintus's household was a haven of warmth, its hearth always glowing, its tables laden with simple but hearty meals, lentils spiced with cumin, bread baked fresh each morning, and occasionally a sliver of fish for me, its flavor rich with sea and smoke. The slaves, kind in their quiet way, would sneak me bits of cheese, their hands gentle as they scratched my ears. Marcus, now fully apprenticed to Quintus, his hands always scented with the pepper and saffron he traded, his grin wide as he tossed me scraps, saying, "Lupus, you're still the greediest hound I know." The city of Neapolis pulsed with its own heartbeat, distinct yet reminiscent of Pompeii in its vibrancy. The Forum was a grand stage, its marble columns gleaming under the sun, where orators debated and merchants hawked their wares, silks that shimmered like water, fruits bursting with juice. I'd weave through the crowds, my nose twitching at the scents of roasted nuts and spilled wine, the chatter of voices blending into a soothing hum. The temples, dedicated to Apollo and Ceres, stood serene, their altars fragrant with offerings of figs and incense, the smoke curling upward like a prayer. I'd rest at their steps, the cool stone a balm to my weary paws. The priest's chants, a low, calming drone. Historically, Neapolis thrived as a cultural and commercial hub, its Greek roots blending with Roman order. The eruption's aftermath, as noted in Roman records, saw the city absorb many of Campania's displaced, its ports and markets swelling with new faces. Gaius spoke of letters from Rome, detailing Titus's efforts to rebuild the region. New aqueducts, temples restored. Though Pompeii remained a ghost, its ruins untouched, preserved in ash for centuries to come. Vesuvius, across the bay, stood quiet now, but I never trusted its calm, my instincts prickling at the memory of its fire. The seasons brought festivals that lit up the city. The Neapolitan Games, held in late summer, filled the streets with music and color, flutes trilling, garlands of laurel draping doorways, the air rich with the scent of sacrificial meats offered to the gods. I'd follow Livia through the crowds, her hand on my back as she danced to the rhythms, her flower crown slipping as she spun. She'd toss me bits of honeyed cake, their sweetness a burst of joy, reminding me of Pompeii's Saturnalia, now a distant echo. Yet the past clung to us in quiet moments. At night, by the hearth, Gaius would read scrolls aloud, tales of heroes or the empire's triumphs, his voice steady but tinged with longing when Pompeii was mentioned. Flavia would pause her spinning, her eyes distant, and Livia would curl against me, whispering, "Lupus, do you dream of home?" I'd nuzzle her, my tongue warm against her cheek, sharing her silent grief for the city buried in ash. The night was quiet, so very quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. My age weighed heavier now, my muzzle almost entirely white, my steps faltering on longer walks. Yet loyalty kept me close to my family, their presence my anchor. I'd lie by Livia's side as she studied, her quill scratching on wax tablets, the soft sound lulling me to doze. Gaius would lift me onto a blanket when my legs tired, his hands gentle, murmuring, "Old friend, you've seen more than most." Flavia's touch, too, was a comfort, her fingers tracing the scars in my fur from years of wandering. In those quiet hours, I reflected on my journey of ash and fire, of a world lost and another found. Pompeii lived in my senses, the warmth of its stones, the clamor of its markets, the scent of roses in its gardens. Neapolis offered new memories, but the animal history of that doomed city was etched in me, story of survival carried in my heart. I'd dream of its streets, now silent, and wake to the warmth of this new home, the family's voices a steady pulse. As autumn approached, the air cooling and the vines heavy with grapes, I felt a deep peace. Vesuvius stood distant, its scars hidden, its power dormant. Neapolis was my world now, its rhythms my own, its people my pack. The story of Pompeii, seen through my eyes, was one of loss, but also of endurance, a testament to the bonds that outlast even the mightiest mountain's rage. As autumn draped Neapolis in hues of amber and crimson, the city seemed to exhale, its bustle softening into a quieter rhythm that matched the slowing of my own steps. I, Lupus, felt the weight of my years more keenly now, my once spry limbs moving with deliberate care, my muzzle a snowy white that caught the golden light filtering through Quintus's courtyard. The air was crisp, scented with the earthy richness of fallen leaves and the faint smoke of hearths kindled against the evening chill. I'd rest beneath the pergola, vines heavy with late grapes, their sweet aroma mingling with the distant tang of the sea, a reminder of the journey that brought us here. Life in Neapolis had become our sanctuary, a tapestry woven with threads of routine, resilience, and quiet joy. Gaius's trade prospered, his stall in the forum now a familiar sight, piled with amphorae of wine and oil that gleamed in the sunlight. I'd join him when I could, my paws padding softly on the cobblestones, my nose twitching at the market's symphony of scents, roasted almonds, fresh-baked bread, and the sharp bite of garum from nearby stalls. Gaius's laughter rang out as he bartered, his voice lighter now, the shadow of Pompeii fading in the warmth of new successes. He'd toss me a crust, murmuring, "Lupus, you old hound," still guarding my coins, and I'd wag my tail, content in his presence. Flavia's garden was a haven of color, its late blooms defying the cooling days. She'd tend roses and sage, her hands gentle as they worked the soil, the scent of herbs clinging to her like a soft cloak. I'd lie nearby, my head on the cool earth, watching her hum tunes from her youth, her voice a soothing thread in the morning's quiet. Livia, now nearing her 8th year, would join us, her curiosity boundless. She'd braid grasses into tiny crowns for me, giggling as she placed them on my head, declaring, "Lupus, you're the guardian of our garden." Her laughter was a melody, bright and fleeting, like the chirp of sparrows at dawn. Quintus's villa was a place of warmth, its hearth always aglow. Marcus, now a young man with a trader's savvy, would return from the docks with stories of ships from Alexandria or Gaul, his hands scented with cloves and pepper. He'd kneel to scratch my ears, grinning, "Lupus, you'd love the spices I've seen today." The household slaves, kind as ever, slipped me bits of cheese or fish, their touch gentle, their voices a soft murmur that blended with the crackle of the fire. Neapolis itself was a vibrant world, its streets alive with the rhythm of a city, untouched by Vesuvius's full wrath. The forum buzzed with merchants and poets, their voices weaving tales of Rome's glory or local gossip, elections for magistrates, rumors of new games. I'd rest in the shade of a statue, perhaps of Neptune, his trident gleaming, the air around him heavy with the scent of incense from nearby altars. The baths, with their steam and laughter, drew me to their entrances, where I'd wait for Gaius or Livia, the scent of olive oil and lavender drifting out like a warm embrace. The temples, too, were serene, their priests chanting softly, the myrrh and wine offerings curling upward in lazy spirals. Historically, Neapolis stood as a beacon in the post-eruption years, its Greek heritage blending with Roman ambition to create a thriving hub. As Suetonius and others noted, Emperor Titus's aid flowed to the region, rebuilding roads and aqueducts, though Pompeii and Herculaneum remained buried, their stories locked in ash until centuries later, Gaius spoke of survivors finding new lives, some in Capua or Misenum, their tales carried by travelers who passed through Quintus's villa. Vesuvius, across the bay, was a quiet giant now, its slopes cloaked in green, but I never forgot its power, my instincts stirring at the faintest tremor, though they grew rare. The festivals of Neapolis brought bursts of life. The autumnal rites to Ceres filled the streets with processions, the air rich with the scent of baked cakes and burning herbs offered to the harvest goddess. I'd follow Livia through the crowds, her hand on my back, her eyes wide as she watched dancers spin to the trill of flutes. She'd sneak me bits of sacrificial bread, its honeyed crust sweet on my tongue, a fleeting echo of Pompeii's feasts. The night was quiet, so very quiet, broken only by the distant strum of a lyre or the soft bark of another dog. In the stillness of evenings, by the hearth's glow, I reflected on my long journey. Pompeii's animal history lived in me, the clatter of its streets, the warmth of its stones, the scent of its gardens, all silenced by ash and fire. I'd survived. A small dog carried by loyalty, my senses painting a world now gone. Neapolis offered new colors, the sea's sparkle, the market's hum, the touch of Livia's hand, but Pompeii remained a whisper in my heart, a story of loss and endurance told through my eyes. Livia's growth was my calendar. She read scrolls now with ease, her voice clear as she recited Virgil, her fingers tracing the words while I dozed at her feet. Gaius and Flavia aged gracefully, their love a quiet strength, their hands gentle, as they lifted me onto blankets when my legs faltered. Marcus, ambitious and kind, spoke of sailing to Rome one day, his dreams big as the sea. I'd listen, head on pause, their voices weaving a future I'd guard as long as I could. As winter loomed, the air sharp with the promise of frost, I felt my time drawing near. My vision dimmed, my steps grew heavy, but my heart remained tethered to this family. I'd dream of Pompeii's sunlit alleys, of chasing cats and lapping from fountains, but wake to the warmth of Neapolis, the family's presence a steady flame. Vesuvius stood distant, its lesson etched in history, a reminder of nature's might and life's fragility. In those final days, I lay by Livia's side, her hand resting on my fur, her breath soft, as she whispered stories to me. The world was peace, the fires crackled a lullaby, the night so very quiet. My tale, a dog's view of ash and fire, of survival and love, would linger in their hearts, a quiet corner of history's vast tapestry. The night was quiet, so very quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire. If this story of Pompeii's ash and fire, told through my eyes, has brought you peace tonight, please consider liking this video and subscribing to The Animal Historian for more journeys into history's quiet corners. Share in the comments where you're listening from, dear friends, and tell me which animal story you'd like to hear next. Your ideas inspire the next adventures. Rest now, and let the gentle waves of history carry you to sleep.